They handed my brother the family business, the one I built from nothing.
So I didn't argue. I didn't beg.
I just smiled and bought the building out from under them. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Callum Vance Whitaker, and for 12 years I ran Whitaker Industrial Supply in Dayton, Ohio.
Not owned it. Not inherited it. Ran it.
I was 24 when I came back home after my father's second mild heart attack. The company was bleeding money, vendors were threatening to cut us off, and payroll barely cleared twice that year.
I told myself I'd stay 2 years. Fix it. Stabilize it. Then leave. But 2 years turned into 12. I slept on a cot in my office during inventory seasons.
I renegotiated contracts that saved us hundreds of thousands. I rebuilt client trust one handshake at a time. My mother, Delilah, used to tell relatives, "Callum saved your father's legacy." Apparently, saving something doesn't mean you get to keep it. Last November, my father, Orson Whitaker, announced his retirement at a catered dinner held inside our warehouse.
Employees clapped.
Brennan stood beside him in a tailored navy suit, smiling like he'd won an award he never studied for. Then Dad cleared his throat and said, "Effective immediately, Brennan Whitaker will assume ownership and leadership of Whitaker Industrial Supply."
No warning.
No discussion.
No acknowledgement of the 12 years I gave up. Just applause.
And in that moment, I realized something cold and permanent. Blood builds expectations. But it doesn't guarantee loyalty. Blood builds expectations. But it doesn't guarantee loyalty. After the applause faded and the dinner ended, I stood alone in the warehouse I practically lived in for over a decade.
Forklifts parked.
Lights dimmed. The smell of metal and dust hanging in the air like it always had. Only this time, it didn't feel like mine anymore. When I came back from Ohio State at 24, Whitaker Industrial was weeks from collapse.
Dad had expanded too quickly. Poor contracts.
High-interest loans. Vendors refusing shipment without upfront payment. I remember sitting at that old steel desk, going through invoices until 3 a.m., realizing we were $480,000 in unsecured debt.
Brennan was in Colorado back then.
Finding himself.
I stayed.
I renegotiated supply agreements, convincing companies like Grayson Tool and Freight to extend 90-day terms. I streamlined operations, cutting unnecessary overhead. I fired 2 managers Dad refused to confront. That decision alone saved us nearly $110,000 annually.
I took no salary the first year. None.
I moved back into my childhood bedroom while Brennan posted photos from ski resorts and music festivals. By year 3, we were profitable again. By year 6, we had doubled revenue. By year 10, we were stable enough to expand warehouse space and upgrade equipment. Dad started introducing me as the backbone of this company.
Funny how that changed.
Because at the retirement dinner, none of that was mentioned. No acknowledgement of the sacrifices. No recognition of the nights I skipped Thanksgiving to make sure year-end numbers closed strong.
Just Brennan. Charming. Polished. Untested. And the worst part? He looked just as surprised as I felt. But he didn't refuse it.
He didn't say, "This belongs to Callum."
He just stepped forward and accepted the keys.
He just stepped forward and accepted the keys.
That's the thing about Brennan.
He never chased responsibility, it just seemed to land in his lap.
Growing up, he was the easy one. Teachers loved him. Neighbors adored him.
He could talk his way out of anything with that relaxed grin and those effortless compliments. Dad used to call him a natural leader.
I was the quiet one.
The dependable one.
The one who fixed things without being asked.
When Brennan finally moved back to Dayton 5 years ago, it wasn't because of the company.
His marketing startup in Denver had folded.
He came home calling it a strategic reset. Dad gave him a director title within 2 weeks.
Director of what? No one really knew. He showed up 3 days a week. Took clients to steak dinners.
Posted up in the glass conference room talking about modern branding. Meanwhile, I handled payroll, logistics, supplier disputes, and compliance audits. Employees came to me with problems. They went to Brennan for laughs. At the retirement dinner, Dad framed the transition like it had been planned for years. "Brennan represents the future," he said proudly. "Fresh energy. Big picture thinking."
Big picture. That was rich.
Because while Brennan brainstormed logos and talked about expansion into neighboring states, I was the one making sure the lights stayed on. After the announcement, Several senior employees approached me quietly. "This doesn't feel right," one of them whispered.
But no one said it publicly. And I didn't either.
I just stood there, shaking Brennan's hand as cameras flashed, pretending this didn't feel like watching someone else inherit a house I built brick by brick. That night, driving home alone, I kept asking myself one question. Was I ever meant to own it? Or was I just meant to save it for him? Was I ever meant to own it? Or was I just meant to save it for him? I didn't sleep that night. Around 6 a.m., I drove back to the warehouse before anyone else arrived. Dad's office light was already on.
He'd always been an early riser. He looked surprised to see me.
"Callum," he said carefully, like I was a situation to manage.
I closed the door behind me. No yelling. No scene. I just asked one question. Why?
He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled like this was a boardroom discussion. "Because you're indispensable."
I almost laughed.
"That's the reason."
"You're the worker," he said plainly.
"Brennan's the leader. You keep things running. He grows them."
12 years. Reduced to labor. I reminded him who renegotiated the Holbrook lease when we almost defaulted. Who restructured the bank loans. Who saved us from bankruptcy. He nodded. Exactly.
"You're operational. But ownership requires vision."
Ownership requires vision. Not sacrifice. Not loyalty. Not sweat.
When I asked what my role would be now, Dad slid a folder across the desk. "Senior Operations Manager. Competitive salary." It was 22% less than what I'd been taking the last 3 years. Under Brennan.
My younger brother.
By the time Brennan walked in at 9 a.m., the paperwork was already drafted. He gave me that uncomfortable half-smile and said, "This will be good for both of us."
Good. That word stuck with me.
Because that morning, standing in that office, something inside me shifted. If they wanted me to think like an employee,
then I'd stop thinking like a son. And start thinking like an investor.
If they wanted me to think like an employee,
then I'd stop thinking like a son. And start thinking like an investor.
There was one detail neither my father nor Brennan seemed to remember. Whitaker Industrial didn't own the warehouse. The company operated inside a 48,000 square foot industrial building on McAllister Drive. But the property itself belonged to Gerald Holbrook, an aging real estate investor who'd owned half the commercial strip since the late 80s. 3 years earlier, when cash flow had nearly collapsed during a supplier dispute, we were weeks from eviction.
Dad had panicked. Brennan wasn't even involved yet.
I was the one who sat across from Gerald at Lincoln Diner and convinced him not to terminate the lease. I personally guaranteed a portion of the rent payments using my own credit. I drafted the extended terms. I met Gerald quarterly with financial updates to reassure him his investment was safe. Gerald didn't trust Whitaker Industrial.
He trusted me.
After the retirement announcement, I kept working quietly for 2 months while Brennan tried to rebrand the company with a new logo and fresh signage. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang.
It was Gerald. He sounded older. Slower.
"I'm retiring for good this time, Callum," he said. "Thinking of selling the building. Figured you should know."
Not Dad. Not Brennan. Me. He hadn't listed it publicly yet. No broker. No advertising.
Just a courtesy call to the person he believed kept the tenant stable. That night, I didn't tell anyone. I opened my laptop. Reviewed my savings. My investments. My equity. And for the first time since the betrayal dinner, I felt calm. Because ownership doesn't always come through inheritance. Sometimes, it comes through opportunity. An opportunity had just dialed my number. An opportunity had just dialed my number.
I didn't hesitate.
The next morning, I met Gerald at his attorney's office downtown.
He laid out the numbers plainly.
The building was valued at $3.2 million.
He wanted a clean exit.
No drawn-out negotiations. "You've always been straight with me, Callum," he said. "If you want it, I'll give you first right before I list it."
I told him I needed 30 days.
That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table running scenarios.
I had equity in my home. A modest investment portfolio.
Retirement savings I'd built carefully over 12 years.
It wasn't enough. So I made one call.
Elias Crowder, owner of Crowder Freight Solutions, one of the suppliers I'd personally brought back after we rebuilt vendor trust. Elias respected loyalty.
He respected numbers even more.
I showed him the projections. Long-term lease security. Rising industrial property values in Dayton.
Predictable cash flow.
He leaned back and said, "You're telling me your own family doesn't see this coming?"
I shook my head. He smiled.
"Then let's move fast." We formed a quiet holding company, CVH Industrial Holdings.
51% mine. 49% his. No announcements. No gossip. Just paperwork.
27 days later, we closed.
No one at Whitaker Industrial knew.
Brennan was busy approving new marketing materials. Dad was enjoying retirement at his lake house. The first they heard of it was when a certified envelope landed on Brennan's desk. Inside was a formal notice of ownership transfer. The building was no longer owned by Holbrook Properties.
It was owned by me. And along with that notice, a revised lease agreement.
And along with that notice, a revised lease agreement. I was in my office when I heard Brennan's voice echo down the hallway. "What the hell is this?" He burst in without knocking, the envelope crumpled in his hand. His face was pale, not angry yet.
Confused. Disoriented.
"You bought the building?" he asked, like it was a rumor he needed disproven. "Yes." Dad showed up 30 minutes later, called in by Brennan like this was some kind of emergency. They both sat across from me, the same office where I'd once been offered a demotion.
Dad's voice was tight.
"Why wouldn't you tell us?"
I folded my hands calmly.
"Because I wasn't required to." The new lease terms reflected current market rates, 38% higher than what we'd been paying under Gerald's grandfathered agreement.
Industrial property values in Dayton had climbed sharply.
The old rate was a favor. Favors expire. "You're punishing us," Brennan snapped.
"No," I replied evenly.
"I'm running an investment." There were two options outlined clearly in the agreement.
Sign the updated lease.
Or negotiate a buyout of operations under new ownership.
Relocating wasn't realistic.
The warehouse had custom racking systems bolted into concrete, reinforced loading docks, upgraded electrical infrastructure, all funded during my tenure.
Moving would cost more than the increase.
For the first time since the retirement dinner, I wasn't the one cornered. Brennan left furious. Dad lingered behind. "I didn't think you were capable of this," he said quietly.
That stung more than anything else. Because he was right.
The version of me who believed hard work guaranteed fairness?
He wouldn't have been capable of this. But that version of me was gone. At
first, Brennan tried to call my bluff. He delayed signing the lease, convinced I'd come around. He told senior staff the rent increase was temporary, a negotiation tactic.
He acted like he still had leverage. He didn't. 30 days passed. Then 4 to 5.
Late fees kicked in automatically under the new agreement.
Cash flow tightened fast.
Brennan had already overspent on a full rebrand, new signage, updated packaging, expensive consultants from Chicago promising national positioning.
None of it increased revenue. It just drained reserves.
Meanwhile, 2 long-term clients quietly declined to renew contracts. They didn't trust instability.
Employees started reaching out to me privately. Not to gossip. To ask if I was okay. That told me everything.
Dad tried stepping back in, unofficially advising Brennan. But he'd already transferred ownership. The banks recognized Brennan as primary decision-maker now.
And Brennan wasn't built for pressure. Payroll bounced once. Just once.
But that's all it takes to shake confidence. By month 3, Whitaker Industrial was behind on both the revised lease and vendor payments. Crowder Freight tightened credit terms immediately. Elias wasn't sentimental.
I sent a formal notice of default. Brennan stormed into my house that night, not yelling this time. Begging.
"You're going to destroy everything," he said.
I looked at him carefully. "No," I replied.
"I'm protecting what I built."
He still believed this was personal revenge. It wasn't. It was correction. And correction doesn't care who it embarrasses. 2 weeks later, the final notice went out.
If payment wasn't resolved within 10 business days,
eviction proceedings would begin.
If payment wasn't resolved within 10 business days,
eviction proceedings would begin.
Those 10 days felt longer than the 12 years I'd given that company.
Dad called twice. I didn't answer the first time. The second time, I did.
His voice sounded older than I'd ever heard it. "There has to be another way."
There was. But it wasn't the one he wanted.
By day 8, Brennan requested a formal meeting, not at the warehouse, but at a neutral conference space downtown. Their attorney was present.
So was Elias.
I brought financial projections, lease enforcement documents, and a buyout proposal I'd prepared weeks earlier.
Brennan looked exhausted. Dark circles. No tailored suit this time. The numbers didn't lie.
With the increased lease, vendor tightening, and recent client losses, Whitaker Industrial's valuation had dropped sharply. Banks were hesitant to extend further credit without collateral.
And the collateral? Was the building, which I owned. I slid the proposal across the table.
Majority acquisition of Whitaker Industrial Supply by CVH Industrial Holdings. Controlling interest, 67%. Buyout price, well below what the company had been worth 6 months earlier.
Dad didn't look at me. Brennan did.
You planned this, he said quietly.
No, I answered honestly.
You forced this. Silence filled the room. The alternative was eviction, public default filings, and likely bankruptcy within a quarter.
By day 10, they signed. Ownership transferred.
The company I rebuilt, the company they handed away,
came back to me, but not as a son.
As a majority stakeholder. When the papers were finalized, Brennan stood up first and walked out without saying a word. Dad lingered only long enough to say, I hope it was worth it.
I didn't respond. Because this wasn't about worth. It was about principle. It was done.
Whitaker Industrial Supply was back under my control.
I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat.
The victory was quiet, measured, necessary. I rehired employees Brennan had let go during his rebranding experiment.
Restored vendor contracts.
Reorganized the warehouse operations with efficiency that only someone who had lived inside it for a decade could manage. Dad didn't attend the official handover.
He hasn't spoken to me in 8 months.
Mom sends quiet holiday texts, simple notes that say more than words ever could.
Brennan? He won't answer calls.
Shows up at the warehouse only for mandatory meetings, eyes fixed to the floor. The employees, the vendors, even Elias Crowder, they all knew the truth.
Leadership isn't inherited. Leadership is earned.
And when loyalty is broken, the only way to repair it is to rebuild, sometimes from the inside out. I renamed the company Whitaker Industrial Group, a subtle correction of history, not revenge. A reminder that hard work and perseverance have value, even when ignored by family. Every invoice, every shipment, every employee schedule, I touched it all again. And the building stood as a silent monument to 12 years of sweat and sacrifice that no favor, no fatherly preference, could erase. Some nights, I drive past Brennan's apartment. I wonder if he regrets the choices that left him powerless.
But that isn't my burden.
I focus on the people who built the company with me. The ones who stayed when things got tough. The ones who quietly understood that family doesn't always protect you, but integrity does.
Sometimes betrayal is unavoidable. Sometimes revenge is necessary.
But sometimes, the best revenge is simply reclaiming what's yours and proving that loyalty, effort, and dedication can't be ignored. And that's how I turned betrayal into ownership, disappointment into strategy, and a broken family legacy into a future I could be proud of.
The end.